So Wendell Vaughn first appears in Captain America Volume 1, issue number 217 in January of 1977. Now, one important, or I guess two important distinctions that we need to make over the course of this comic book is that Wendell Vaughn will first be introduced to us as Marvel Boy, but it's important that we understand that he is not the first Marvel Boy. Eventually his name will transition and he will become Quasar, but the first Marvel Boy was Robert Grayson, and he appeared as Marvel Boy issues number 1 and 2 in 1950, and then later on an astonishing Marvel Boy for issues 3, 4, 5, 7, and 6, at which point his series was canceled. But what we also need to clarify here is that the quantum bands don't appear here for the very first time. The quantum bands actually appeared during the stories of Marvel Boy in the 1950s, and that version of the Marvel Boy didn't nearly have the kind of power that Wendell Vaughn will demonstrate with the quantum bands as he gains the quantum bands in his solo series with the Origins, and when we see him in this comic, as well as some of the comics that came along later on. But the other thing to bear in mind here, again, as a little bit of an introduction, is that much like the Silver Surfer, what we'll see here is that Wendell Vaughn will first be introduced to us, and he already has his powers. It won't be until we get into his solo series that we will learn the origin behind how he gained his abilities, as well as what it is that the quantum bands were created for, and what his role will be within the Marvel universe. So what we see starting out with Captain America issue number 217 is that the Falcon and Captain America are signing autographs for a lot of younger kids. And again, this is something that you saw pretty frequently in comic books in the 1960s. This was simply just a way for Marvel Comics to demonstrate to the reader that they were teenage-friendly and a child-friendly source of entertainment. But what we see is that the Falcon begins to pull Captain America off and tell Captain America that the two of them need to get back to their meeting. And this is done for a couple reasons. The first reason is because they're sort of overwhelmed by the number of kids, teenagers that want autographs, but two, there was a previous set of events that took place whereby Captain America's mind is sort of in a different place. Now, we're not necessarily going to go into this just because it's not very relevant to the idea of Wendell Vaughn and how he becomes Quasar. We're simply just stating this so that you guys understand why it is that Captain America isn't really the one to say that we need to get on with our mission. So what we see is that Captain America and the Falcon head to a barbershop. And when they head to a barbershop, we see that both barbers remove the current customers from the premises, and they allow Captain America and the Falcon to sit in the barber's chairs. From here, we see that as Captain America and the Falcon are sitting in the chairs, that they were lowered down below the building. And of course, we see that one of the previous customers returns, and the barbers in particular tell the customer they're ready to go ahead and take care of him now. From here, we transition back to Captain America and the Falcon, and we see that what they've done here is they've lowered down into one of many shield complexes. This is simply just a shield complex that exists below this barbershop. There are a multitude of shield complexes that exist in this same facet. That is to say, they exist beneath or are part of very inconspicuous locations. But then what we see going on here is that a few shield soldiers jump out and ambush Captain America and the Falcon. And of course, we see that for the most part, Captain America and Falcon are easily able to overpower these shield agents. They're really not much of a challenge for the fighting prowess of either of these individuals. What we also see here is that Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan appear, and they call off the SHIELD agents. And what we learn here is that they had gained information which had indicated that Captain America had intended to turn against SHIELD, that Captain America was a traitor. And of course, Captain America is not really sure where they're getting this information from, but the whole reason why the SHIELD agents had attacked Captain America and Falcon was for Nick Fury to analyze them in terms of their fighting abilities and to determine whether or not they were actually Captain America and the Falcon, which of course Nick Fury was able to determine. What we see is that Nick Fury takes Captain America and the Falcon to where they're holding the prisoner that has supposedly given them this information. And what we see is that this prisoner's mind is being examined by SHIELD, and that this prisoner has, in some way or another, had false memories implanted into his mind, which, when his mind was read, had informed SHIELD that Captain America America intended to turn against him. Now, of course, as we said, Captain America has been revealed by Nick Fury to be the genuine article. He really has no intention to infiltrate or to betray S.H.I.E.L.D. But Nick Fury's concern here is that this won't just stop at Captain America, that there may be others who have infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., and Nick Fury's mission is to find these individuals, to locate who they are, and to weed them out. From here, we see that this prisoner is taken away, but as the prisoner is being taken away, he reaches in his eye for something or another, and what we learn is that what he's done is he's taken a pill, taken some kind of a dropper, and this results in him dying. Now, why it is that he did this is something that we don't really know, and in truth, it's not extremely important, but I would go as far as to say that this is probably a mantra among the corporation, which is the organization looking to, infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., and that the mindset of the corporation's agents is that if you're ever caught in the process or over the course of your duties, to simply just kill yourself. Of course, we see that without this individual as a means for them to interrogate people even more, that for the most part, S.H.I.E.L.D. is really not sure where to go here, that they're really sort of left hanging in terms of possible information that can be gained. What we also see is that Nick Fury has created a sort of superpowered team, and that the purpose of this team is to be a group of individuals that will fight on behalf of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, the goal of Nick Fury is to have Captain America train and lead this group. Now, this is when we're first introduced to Wendell Vaughn as Marvel Boy or Quasar. And what we see here is that the first member of the team is the Blue Streak. The second member of the team is the Vamp. The third member of the team is an individual named the Texas Twister. And the last member of the team is Marvel Boy himself, Wendell Vaughn. Now, this is when things get a little confusing to the average reader. It's not until Marvel 2-in-1 issue number 53 that Wendell Vaughn will start being referred to as Quasar. But we see that Wendell Vaughn mentioned here that they may recognize him, and that perhaps they might recognize him from the 1950s version of himself. Now, this is simply just Wendell Vaughn pointing to the idea that at one point in time there was a version of Marvel Boy with which he looks almost exactly identical to, but he is a totally separate individual. We also see him demonstrate his powers and say that his powers are almost identical to Marvel Boy's powers from the 1950s, although Wendell Vaughn is able to demonstrate a little more destruction in terms of his capabilities. And of course, we see Wendell Vaughn say that these powers are courtesy of Tony Stark, which again is something that we'll get into when we get into the origin story of Wendell Vaughn. What we see here is that Captain America refuses to lead this team. Captain America tells Nick Fury that he does not want to be part of this, that he doesn't want to effectively babysit a bunch of new people. From here, we see that as a result of Captain America refusing to train Nick Fury's team, that Nick Fury orders the team to attack Captain America. From here, we see Captain America tell the Falcon to hold off, and Captain America is able to single-handedly defeat all of the members of Nick Fury's new team. From here, as the fight progresses, we see that Captain America calls off the conflict. And all this really was a chance for Captain America to examine the team, a chance for Captain America to see what it was that they're capable of. We see that Captain America says that, of course, that these individuals were provoked and that this was simply a test, and he just wanted to see how good they were. He said that they're pretty good in terms of their individual fighting, but that their ability to fight as a team, to fight as a cohesive unit, is something that just isn't there, and that they're going to need to practice fighting as a team in order for them to be successful as a team. And so what we see is Captain America saying that the Falcon, that Sam Wilson, is the best person to lead this team. Sam Wilson, as far as Captain America is concerned, has gone as far as he can go, in the sense that Sam Wilson has learned most everything he can learn from Captain America. That Sam Wilson, in a lot of ways, in terms of his mindset, in terms of his understanding of combat, of how to train groups, how to fight against groups, and so on, that he's on par with Captain America. The only thing he lacks in relation to Captain America is Captain America's physical abilities. From here, we see that Sam Wilson is a little shocked. Sam Wilson's a little surprised, and he's a little taken aback by the fact that Captain America so willingly offered to appoint him as the leader of this team. And of course, we see that as Captain America goes about his business, that the Falcon, along with Nick Fury, undergo the process of training these individuals to fight cohesively as a unit. Now, there is a little bit more to this comic involving Captain America himself, but again, this is just a discussion about Quasar, or about Wendell Vaughn. And so what we're going to do is we're going to transition to Quasar number 1. Now, we could stop and we could talk about Marvel 2-in-1, but for the most part, Marvel 2-in-1, like several other comic books that Wendell Vaughn made appearances in, really doesn't do anything for us other than establish the fact that Wendell Vaughn went by the name Quasar, that he was introduced to us with the name Quasar. And that's really all it does. It's the first time that we will ever see Wendell Vaughn arrive as Quasar, or I guess be mentioned or discussed as Quasar. So with Quasar issue number 1, we get the actual origin story of Wendell Vaughn. We learn what it is that had happened, what it is that had taken place with regards to both Robert Grayson as Marvel Boy and Wendell Vaughn in terms of his gaining his abilities. Now with Marvel Boy, it's not necessarily as deep of a backstory as we will get with Quasar issue number 2 in terms of the story being told from the perspective of Death Urge, which of course is a villain that we'll discuss slightly during this comic. But what we see here is that at some point along the line prior to the Fantastic Four, that Robert Grayson had the abilities of Quasar. He had the quantum bands, and that due to some set of circumstances that we didn't really know anything about, that he had turned against humanity. He had become a villain instead of a superhero, and that as a result he had confronted the Fantastic Four. Now there was about a 10-year gap or so between the time that he had first showed up and the time that he had reappeared as a bad guy, but nonetheless what we learn is that during this conflict with the Fantastic Four, he is, I guess, more or less overwhelmed by the power of the quantum bands and is totally incinerated. From here, we switch to the perspective of Tony Stark, and we see that we switch to the perspective of Nick Fury, and we see that Nick Fury is talking to Tony Stark, among others, about the quantum bands themselves, and about how the quantum bands are, for the most part, something they're totally unaware of. They're not exactly sure how to analyze them or what they're capable of, and so Tony Stark is turning this over to the science division of Stark Industries. From here, what we also learn is that Wendell Vaughn's father is a member of this particular science community. His name is Gilbert Vaughn, and for the most part, he's not an extremely important character during these origin stories, but he's important enough in the sense that he plays a pretty important role in terms of how Wendell Vaughn perceives himself and how it is that he functions throughout his normal life, and why it is that he gets involved in the things that he does. But what we see is that Gilbert Vaughn will be the head scientist undertaking the task of going through this, analyzing these quantum bands. From here, we switch to the perspective of Wendell Vaughn, and Wendell Vaughn is undergoing his training in the S.H.I.E.L.D. Recruitment Center. He is trying to demonstrate his ability that he will be an effective S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and what we see is that for the most part, against his opponent, he's not really able to demonstrate what's necessary in order to be effective. He's not able to demonstrate what's necessary in order to have that killer instinct, as we will learn later on, and this is something that's brought up to him when he is in front of Dum Dum Dugan, who of course, as we know, is the right-hand man of Nick Fury. Dum Dum Dugan says the problem with Wendell Vaughn is he doesn't have the killer instinct. He has superior fighting prowess, he has a strong intellect, but he just doesn't have what it takes to be a field agent. And so what we see is that while Wendell Vaughn hasn't necessarily failed his S.H.I.E.L.D. training, that his assignment will be given to him somewhere along the line, but that he will not be a field agent. From here, we switch to Stark Industries, and we see that Gilbert Vaughn, among others, are examining the quantum bands, and the quantum bands absorb all forms of energy that are being distributed to them, that there really isn't anything that can be done to annihilate the quantum bands, more or less. From here, we also see that one of the individuals who is part of this team is going out for refreshments of sorts. And what we see is that this individual is actually a spy. Now, this individual is more or less informing an unknown entity, an unknown group, about the plans that are going on, about how the time to strike may be relatively close. From here, we switch back to Wendell Vaughn. And Wendell Vaughn's at home, of course, he's talking to his mom, and he's sort of going on about how his position in S.H.I.E.L.D., the fact that he's not going to be a field agent, may be something that's looked down upon by his father, that he hasn't really made his dad as proud as he wants him to be. And again, this is touching on the element of Wendell Vaughn that tells us that Wendell Vaughn is in such a mindset that his underlying drive, his underlying motivation is a desire to demonstrate to his father that he is someone that can make his father proud, and this will be an ongoing concept with regards to his character. In addition, What we also see is that the assignment that's given to Wendell Vaughn is to simply safeguard, and it's basically an assignment whereby he's to stand at a door and guard that door, and that door is the access to where his father is performing his experiments. And this is kind of a letdown to Wendell Vaughn. This is simply just an instance whereby he's just going to be monitoring what it is that his father does, and he's not really going to have any kind of a part in it. It's really, for him, a way to feel like a disappointment to his father. From here, we see that an individual named William Wesley arrives. And William Wesley is the individual that's been brought on board by S.H.I.E.L.D. to test the quantum bands. And what we see is that William Wesley puts on the quantum bands, and when he does, the quantum bands begin to surge through his body with energy. Now, this is quite a development for Gilbert Vaughn and his crew, and the reason why is because they are looking at this idea as maybe some method that can be used, that it can be duplicated. Maybe they can add this into kind of a super soldier situation. But what we see is that as William Wesley goes through the process of using these bands, the quantum bands allow him all sorts of energy projection. They allow him the ability of flight and so on and so forth. But as time progresses, it begins to become too much. The energy begins to surge inside of him. And when it does, he finds himself more or less being overloaded by these powers. And we see that he's totally disintegrated. And this is the same thing that we had seen with Marvel Boy in the 1950s stories regarding his possession of the Marvel bands. From here, we see that the individual who is a spy on behalf of some unknown entity is a man named Zane. And what we learn here is that Zane is a spy for Advanced Idea Mechanics. Now, Advanced Idea Mechanics is a technological terrorist group. This is a group that falls in line with Hydra, as both Hydra and AIM are led by Baron von Strucker, but this is an organization that exists in terms of employing cybernetics, employing machines in order to do its bidding. What we see here is that Wendell Vaughn and his father are stuck within the lab, and Wendell Vaughn is trying to thwart or trying to assist in thwarting this AIM threat, and in the process, he grabs the quantum bands. Now, when he does, he puts them on, and his father says this really isn't a good idea, that there's no telling what'll happen when he does. What we see is that Wendell Vaughn puts on the quantum bands, and when he does, he gets a glimpse of Eon. From there, he transitions back to the present, and we see him wielding the powers of the quantum bands against AIM. What we also see here is something very interesting. We see Wendell Vaughn implementing the powers of the quantum bands in the exact same way that the Green Lantern implements the power of his ring, in the sense that if Wendell Vaughn thinks of something, that the bands will manifest it. And so, of course, we see that his father tells Wendell Vaughn to ram the cyborgs, and when Wendell Vaughn does, the quantum bands manifest a physical ram head in the form of energy, and of course he's able to overpower the cyborgs. And this is what we see taking place here. We see that Wendell Vaughn uses his powers in a multitude of ways to, in effect, quash the entire AIM invasion by himself. From this point, we see that Wendell Vaughn, after the conflict has ended, is approached by Nick Fury. And when he's approached by Nick Fury, we see that he's able to control his energy, that we see he's able to allow the energy that normally would have overloaded him to kind of disperse. And we see that he's, for the most part, able to totally control his powers. What we also see is that as a result of him being able to control his abilities and the fact that he was able to quash the threat, that Nick Fury offers him a position. Now, what we learn here as this comic begins to come to an end is that this was the backstory. This was the initial story to Wendell Vaughn becoming part of the superhero group that would meet Captain America in Captain America issue number 217. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.
We can have they have Super Scroll.
Oh, we don't have Super Scroll?
I thought Marvel had.
Marvel and Fox own the Scrolls, but Fox has exclusivity rights for Super Scroll, which keep it. So, like,
you don't like
cares?
Super Scroll?
Who cares?
He's got the powers of the Fantastic Four. You don't like Super Scroll?
What?